The rejection was so public, so humiliating, that Eleanor thought she might die right there at the altar. The groom, a wealthy man with a wandering eye, had taken one look at her walking down the aisle and literally walked off the stage. He didn't say a word. He simply left her standing there in a white dress that suddenly felt like a costume. The church fell silent. Then the whispers started, spreading like wildfire through the pews. Someone shouted something about her being too plain, too awkward. Within minutes, the entire event had collapsed into chaos and shame. Her father, enraged by the humiliation and the loss of the dowry money, made a decision that would alter the course of Eleanor's entire life. If nobody in their social circle would have her, he would sell her to the highest bidder like a piece of livestock. Within a week, advertisements appeared in obscure frontier newspapers. Woman of marriageable age, comes with substantial dowry, quick sale necessary. The bids came from rough men in rough places, mining towns, remote settlements, lonely ranches at the edge of civilization. When a mountain man named Isaac Blackwell placed the final bid, Eleanor's father celebrated like he'd won the lottery. He didn't care where she was going, only that he was finally rid of her. The journey to the Colorado mountains took 3 weeks. Eleanor traveled by train and then by wagon, and through it all, nobody would tell her anything about the man who had bought her. When the wagon finally stopped at a remote cabin surrounded by nothing but pine trees and endless sky, Eleanor was covered in dust and fear. A man emerged from the cabin, tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that looked like it had been carved from stone. His eyes were ice blue and terrifyingly cold. He didn't say hello. He simply nodded to the wagon driver and said, "Where is she?" "In the back," the driver said nervously. "But sir, there's one condition," her father insisted. He held up a burlap sack. "You don't remove it until after the marriage is official." Those were his exact instructions. Said if you saw her face, you'd send her right back. Wanted to make sure the deal was locked down first. Isaac stared at the sack like it was the most offensive thing he'd ever encountered. But he was a man of his word, and he'd paid good money for this arrangement. So he simply nodded. Eleanor was led out of the wagon with the sack still covering her head, disorienting her completely. They walked together through what felt like a long distance, and then she heard a door close. They were inside somewhere, alone. "There's a preacher coming tomorrow," Isaac said, his voice rough and emotionless. "We'll get married. You'll have your own room. You'll work if you want or stay in the house. I don't care either way. But you'll be treated with respect, and anyone who disrespects you will answer to me." He paused. "Tomorrow, after the ceremony, you can take off the sack." Eleanor spent the entire night in that darkness, sitting on a bed in a room she couldn't see, wondering what kind of monster would agree to such a bizarre arrangement. She imagined every possibility: a man so ugly he had to hide her, a man so cruel he wanted to destroy her confidence. Her mind spiraled through nightmare scenarios while the mountain wind howled outside. The preacher arrived in the morning. The ceremony took 5 minutes. Eleanor stood in the sack, feeling like a ghost, a phantom bride, a woman so worthless that even her own husband needed to be tricked into seeing her. She said her vows through tears, and Isaac said his in a steady voice that gave nothing away, and then it was done. They were married. "You can take it off now," Isaac said quietly. Eleanor's hands shook as she pulled the burlap sack away from her face. Light flooded in, blinding her temporarily. She blinked, adjusting, and then she looked up at her husband for the first time with her own eyes. What she saw stopped her breath entirely. Isaac's expression had completely transformed. His ice-blue eyes were wide with shock, and his weathered face had softened into something that looked almost like wonder. He stared at her with such intensity that Eleanor instinctively touched her face, convinced something was wrong. "Your father lied," Isaac breathed. It wasn't a question. "What?" Eleanor asked, confused. "He said you were plain, that you were so plain no man could look at you without disappointment." Isaac stepped closer, studying her face like it was a work of art. "He showed me a photograph from so far away I couldn't see anything. He told me the sack was to protect his investment, to make sure I didn't change my mind. But I think he was lying. I think he was terrified I'd see your face and refused to go through with it." Eleanor felt her knees go weak. I don't understand," "You're beautiful," Isaac said simply. "Truly, genuinely beautiful. Not in the conventional way, maybe. But there's something in your face, strength, kindness, intelligence, that catches the light. The first man who looked at you and ran away was a fool. A blind, heartless fool." Over the next weeks and months, Eleanor began to understand that her husband was a man of few words but profound actions. He showed her around the cabin he'd built with his own hands. He taught her about the mountains, about surviving in this harsh and beautiful landscape. He cooked meals for her without asking, without expecting gratitude. He built her a bathroom with hot water heated by a system he'd engineered himself. He gave her books to read and a study where she could spend her days if she wanted. And slowly, carefully, he showed her how to see herself the way he saw her. One evening, about 2 months into their marriage, Eleanor found a mirror, the first one she'd seen since arriving at the cabin. It was small and handheld, clearly brought from town specifically for her. She looked at her reflection for the first time, studying the face that had been deemed so unworthy of love. She saw a woman with intelligent eyes and a strong jawline, skin weathered slightly by the journey. But when Isaac came and stood beside her, looking at her reflection, she saw what he saw. She saw someone worthy. She saw someone beautiful. "Why would anyone run from you?" Isaac asked. And there was genuine confusion in his voice, like he was trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "Because I'm not what he wanted," Eleanor said quietly. "I'm not what anyone wanted." "Then everyone else was wrong," Isaac said with absolute certainty. "And I'm grateful for their wrongness, because their mistake became my blessing." Eleanor began to heal in that mountain cabin in ways she never could have healed in civilization. There was no society to judge her, no mirrors reflecting other people's opinions, no constant comparison to other women deemed more worthy or beautiful or acceptable. There was only Isaac and the mountains and the slow, steady process of learning to love herself. 1 year after she arrived, Eleanor found out she was pregnant. Isaac wept when she told him, actual tears streaming down his weathered face. He held her like she was made of glass and whispered promises into her hair about the daughter they were going to have, about how he would never, ever let her believe the lies about her own worth. Their daughter was born the next spring, a beautiful girl with her father's ice-blue eyes and her mother's intelligent gaze. They named her Hope, and from the moment she was born, Isaac made sure she knew she was wanted, treasured, celebrated exactly as she was. Years passed. Eleanor became the woman the mountain man saw when he removed that burlap sack. She became strong and confident and radiant. She built a life in those mountains that was far richer than any life she could have built in the city. She became known in the small frontier towns as a woman of remarkable character, someone who helped other rejected women find their way to places where they could be valued. When Eleanor eventually wrote to her father, she told him what his rejection had given her. A man who saw her true value, a life of freedom and authenticity. A daughter who would never believe the lies that society told about female worth. And most importantly, the understanding that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the ugliest rejection. Isaac, reading over her shoulder, added his own postscript. He wrote that in 20 years of hard living in those mountains, he'd never seen anything as beautiful as the woman his money had bought, but his heart had chosen every single day since. He wrote that her father had inadvertently given him the greatest treasure of his life. If you've ever been rejected, if you've ever been told you weren't enough, if you've ever felt like your face or your body or your very existence was a disappointment, hear this truth. The people who reject you are often seeing through their own brokenness. But somewhere, there is someone who will see your face and gasp. Not in horror, but in recognition of something real and true and beautiful that was always there. Eleanor's father sent her away thinking he was getting rid of a problem. Instead, he was delivering a treasure to a man who would spend his entire life making sure she knew her true value. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Share it with the person who's been told they're not enough. Share it with the girl who believes the rejection, because maybe your sharing this story will be the moment she realizes that the people who left were never the right people to begin with. And somewhere, Someone is waiting to see her face and finally say the words she's been longing to hear. You were worth waiting for. You were always worth it.